In as little as 20 seconds, 24 nautical miles off Venezuela's coast, the USS Gerald R. Ford could present Caracas with a powerful signal the world would not ignore. This is far more than a display of military presence. It is a deliberate, carefully measured move meant to show that every decision carries weight and every consequence can ripple far beyond the horizon. Behind the Ford's imposing presence lies a tense legal and strategic standoff. Caracas has unilaterally labeled its full 200 nautical mile economic zone as a restricted military area, even though the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea recognizes only 12 nautical miles as sovereign territory. That puts the U.S. Navy in an extremely sensitive position. It must maneuver in international waters in a way that defends freedom of navigation without allowing itself to be framed as the side escalating the situation. That legal dilemma becomes even more complicated because of the environment itself. In this part of the Caribbean, the sea creates a serious acoustic challenge. Layers of water with changing temperatures, known as thermoclines, bend and scatter sonar in unpredictable ways. Even for the advanced detection systems aboard an American destroyer, tracking a target here can feel like trying to catch a whisper inside a maze of echoes. Hidden within that acoustic confusion is one of the most dangerous assets in the area: the German-built Type 209 diesel-electric submarine. Operating on near-silent battery power, it becomes almost invisible, capable of remaining still beneath a thermocline while using the wreck of an old cargo ship to blur its acoustic trace even further. From that position, the Venezuelan submarine can move into striking range in less than 5 minutes. The danger on the surface is just as complex and in some ways even more unsettling. Venezuela is not relying primarily on major warships. Instead, it places armed fishing trawlers and Coast Guard cutters in the path of the operation, turning the encounter into a dangerous game of nerve. The objective is not open confrontation. The objective is to trigger an incident. If a smaller vessel intentionally cuts across the course of a multi-billion-dollar American warship, the U.S. commander could instantly face legal scrutiny, political fallout, and a media storm. In that moment, the entire mission could unravel. Venezuela appears to have calculated every dimension of the scenario: the law, the physics of the sea, and the power of the public narrative. It built a problem that seems almost impossible to solve. But there was one factor it did not fully account for, a factor moving at 30,000 feet and preparing to change everything. That factor is the P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft, and its mission is already underway. Far below, the Venezuelan Type 209 has held position for 48 hours. For 2 full days, its crew has remained in near total silence, running on battery power and listening carefully. Its purpose is not necessarily direct confrontation. Its real objective is intelligence, to capture the unique acoustic signature of the USS Ford, a piece of information with enormous strategic value, especially in the hands of America's rivals. The submarine waits like a shadow for the perfect opportunity to record that prize. But silence comes with a cost. Its batteries are running low. Sooner or later, it must snorkel, raising a narrow air intake tube above the surface so the diesel engines can recharge the vessel. And that brief moment of exposure is exactly what the P-8 has been anticipating. From above, the aircraft releases a pattern of sonobuoys into the sea. Yet even this is not simple. The noise from a nearby shipping lane creates a flood of false signals, turning the search into a maddening puzzle. These devices are not just trying to locate the submarine itself. They are listening for something even more subtle: the faint intake of air from its snorkel. Once the P-8 narrows down the submarine's likely position through careful analysis, the USS Ramage, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, steps in. Its commander makes a difficult but highly calculated choice. He orders the activation of low-frequency active sonar. At that moment, the Navy shifts from searching to confirming. A single powerful pulse tears through the water, driving past the thermocline as though it were not there at all. Inside the steel hull of the Type 209, that sonar pulse is not merely heard, it is felt. It arrives as a shockwave, a sudden and unmistakable signal that the hidden game may be over. It hits like a physical shockwave, like a massive hammer slamming into a steel bell and sending vibrations through every beam and compartment. The pressure of that sonar pulse is so overwhelming it can rattle a crew and interfere with delicate onboard systems. For the U.S. Navy, that sound is more than detection. It is a message, a silent declaration that the hidden advantage is gone. It is a calculated form of pressure, forcing the Venezuelan commander into a no-win decision. Remain still and endure the crushing acoustic impact, or maneuver to escape it and expose the submarine's exact location. The Americans do not need to say a word. The signal is clear. Your cover is gone, your mission has failed, and the safest option is to surface and withdraw. With the underwater threat effectively contained, the confrontation shifts above the sea. As the USS Ford continues on course, one final and desperate move begins to take shape. two Venezuelan Su-30 Mk, flankers among Russia's most formidable air superiority fighters, race toward the carrier group. They are equipped with Kach-31 anti-ship missiles, weapons capable of closing the distance to the ford in under 4 minutes. At this point, the situation is no longer about legal positioning or maritime pressure. It has become a direct military test. The lead Venezuelan pilot initially depends on his passive infrared search and track system, hoping to remain difficult to detect, but impatience takes over. He switches on his fire control radar and locks onto an E-2D Hawkeye, the airborne command hub of the carrier group. On his display, the American aircraft is now clearly marked. Under standard rules of engagement, that kind of radar lock is a serious hostile signal, enough to justify an immediate response. But the order to fire never comes. The Americans are not trying to ignite a wider conflict. They are trying to end the standoff without a single shot. The Venezuelan pilot assumes his radar gives him control of the encounter. What he does not realize is that the same radar is also broadcasting his exact position, speed, and intentions to every system monitoring the spectrum. And one aircraft is listening with extraordinary precision, the EA-18G Growler. The Growler is not simply a fighter. It is an airborne electronic warfare platform built to dominate the invisible battlefield of signals, sensors, and data. Its true weapon is not a missile. It is disruption. What follows is not a traditional attack, but a non-lethal electronic strike, powerful enough to completely unravel the pilot's situational awareness. The Growler does not merely interfere with the Su-30's radar. It overwhelms the pilot's entire picture of the sky. His sensors are flooded with false returns, phantom aircraft, and conflicting signals, creating the illusion of threats from every direction. The single clear target he had moments earlier disappears into a storm of digital confusion. In an instant, the KH-31 missile under his wing is no longer a credible threat. Without a reliable targeting picture, it is reduced to dead weight. Then comes the final move. While the Growler is blinding the flankers electronically, two FA-18 Super Hornets are quietly guided into position by the distant Hawkeye. They keep their own radar silent and approach from the Venezuelan pilot's blind side, remaining completely unnoticed. Only when the trap is fully set do the Hornets briefly switch on their radars. Inside the Venezuelan cockpit, the radar warning receiver does not simply alert. It erupts with a continuous piercing tone, the unmistakable sign of an immediate close-range missile lock. The pilot turns his head to the left. There, just off his wingtip, is an American Super Hornet. Its pilot gives a slow, deliberate nod. Mounted beneath the wing, an AIM-9X Sidewinder is already tracking the heat of the Venezuelan jet's engine. No missile is launched, no words are spoken, none are needed. The message is devastatingly clear. We tracked you, we neutralized your advantage, and this encounter is finished. The Venezuelan pilot turns away. It is more than a retreat. It is the unmistakable acceptance that the confrontation has already been decided. Inside the cockpit, the sharp missile lock alarm vanishes, replaced by a silence that feels even more unsettling. In a matter of seconds, the pilot has gone from feeling in control to realizing he is completely exposed. A moment earlier, he believed he was the one dictating the encounter, backed by some of the most advanced equipment in his arsenal. The next, he understands that he has been outmaneuvered by an opponent he never even saw. At Venezuela's naval command, the confusion on the ground reflects the same shock. The displays that had once shown a clear picture of the American fleet are now crowded with contradictory and unreliable information. Their submarine, once considered a hidden advantage, has gone quiet not as part of the plan, but because it no longer has a choice. Their frontline fighters, the pride of the Air Force, have been stripped of their effectiveness. Step by step, the legal and military pressure they had carefully built has been taken apart without a single direct exchange. In Caracas, military analysts will likely spend months trying to understand every second of the encounter. And the conclusion will be hard to ignore. The Americans never truly entered the game Venezuela had prepared. While Caracas focused on the visible battlefield of ships, submarines, and aircraft, the United States operated on another level entirely, shaping the fight through control of the electromagnetic environment. They will also examine the scenario that never happened, asking what the outcome might have been if the pilot had actually launched the KH-31. The result would have been grimly predictable. With its guidance already disrupted by electronic attack, the missile would have lost effectiveness almost immediately. Moments later, it would likely have been intercepted by the carrier group's layered defenses. And from there, the consequences could have escalated with devastating speed. The deeper lesson for Caracas is not simply about firepower. It is about capability in a broader sense. Acquiring advanced weapons is only the beginning. The real test is whether those systems can still function under pressure, especially inside a hostile electronic battle space. That is where the true gap was exposed. Venezuela arrived with impressive hardware, only to discover that hardware alone means little when the other side controls the invisible rules of the fight. The USS Gerald R. Ford never changed course. It moved through the so-called restricted zone as though it were open water, because under international law, that is exactly what it was. The United States prevailed not by ignoring the rules, but by reinforcing them through overwhelming technical superiority, leaving Venezuela with no workable response except to step back. The signal sent across the Caribbean that day was stark and unmistakable. Military posturing can create headlines, but it cannot hide weakness when real capability is tested. A sonar pulse cannot be bluffed. Electronic dominance cannot be faked. And challenging a superpower that controls not only the sea, but also the spectrum that shapes modern conflict, carries consequences that are impossible to ignore. The Venezuelan ships and aircraft returned to port without visible damage. Yet the impact was far deeper than anything left by a conventional clash. What came back with them was something far more sobering, undeniable proof that the gap in capability was wider than many had imagined. Their crews did not return as broken men. They returned with something more difficult to face, the realization that they had been outclassed before the real contest had even begun. What they carried home was not the memory of a battle lost, but the understanding that they had never truly been allowed into the fight at all. Inside the cockpit, the sharp missile lock warning suddenly disappears, replaced by a silence that feels far more unsettling. In a matter of seconds, the pilot has gone from feeling in control to realizing just how vulnerable he really is. One moment, he believed he was the hunter, confident in the strength of his advanced Russian-built systems. The next, he understands he has become the one being tracked, completely exposed and spared only because the other side chose restraint. Back at Venezuela's naval command, the confusion is just as intense. Their screens, which moments earlier showed a clear picture of the American fleet, are now flooded with contradictory and meaningless data. Their submarine, once considered their hidden advantage, has gone quiet, not because it succeeded in disappearing, but because it had no other option. Their frontline fighters, the pride of the Air Force, have been reduced to flying blind. The legal and military pressure they carefully designed has been dismantled step by step, and all of it happened without a single direct exchange. In Caracas, analysts will likely spend months breaking down every second of what took place, and the conclusion will be difficult to avoid. The Americans never truly played the game Venezuela had prepared for them. While Caracas focused on the visible battlefield of ships, submarines, and aircraft, the U.S. Navy was operating on another level entirely, shaping the confrontation through control of the electromagnetic spectrum. They will also examine the move that was never made, asking what would have happened if the KH-31 had actually been launched. The answer is deeply sobering. With its guidance already disrupted by the Growler's electronic attack, the missile would have lost effectiveness almost immediately. Within moments, it likely would have been intercepted by the carrier group's layered defenses. What looked like a credible threat on paper would, in reality, have failed before it ever changed the outcome. And that is the real lesson for Caracas. This was never simply about firepower, it was about dimension. They learned that buying advanced hardware is only the first step. The real challenge is making that hardware function inside a hostile electronic environment. That is where the true gap was exposed. They arrived with capable machines, only to discover that machines alone mean very little when the other side controls the invisible space where modern conflict is decided. The USS Gerald R. Ford never changed its course. It moved through the so-called restricted zone as though it were open sea, because under international law, that is exactly what it was. The United States prevailed not by ignoring the rules, but by reinforcing them with a level of technological integration so complete that Venezuela's only realistic option was to step back. The message sent across the Caribbean that day was cold, quiet, and unmistakable. You can posture with ships, you can pressure with aircraft, but there are some realities that cannot be bluffed. A sonar pulse cannot be argued with, electronic dominance cannot be improvised. And confronting a superpower that commands not only the sea, but also the spectrum that defines modern military power, leads to consequences that are impossible to ignore. The Venezuelan ships and aircraft returned to port without visible damage, but the result was no less painful. What they carried home was something far more difficult to hide, clear proof of how wide the technological gap had become. Their crews were not broken. They were confronted with something even more demoralizing, the realization that the confrontation had been decided before they were ever truly able to shape it. And with that came something else, valuable electronic and acoustic intelligence. because even a victory without open combat still reveals important capabilities to an attentive observer. For Caracas, perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is that what felt to them like a national crisis may have been, for the sailors aboard the USS Ford, just another routine operation carried out with calm precision. A standard demonstration of integrated warfare on a level they cannot yet match, and perhaps cannot fully interpret. But in truth, this was never only about Venezuela. What unfolded in the Caribbean was a signal transmitted on a much wider frequency. The real audience was not limited to Caracas. It was also being heard in Beijing, in Moscow, and in Tehran. In an era shaped by gray zone confrontation where states test limits without openly declaring war, the United States offered a clear demonstration of how it responds. Not with reckless force, but with overwhelming and largely invisible technological superiority. The lesson was meant for any adversary convinced that clever tactics alone are enough to outmaneuver the US Navy. The message was simple. America's chain of action begins long before any missile is ever launched. It starts in the electromagnetic spectrum, the domain where modern military advantage is often decided before the first visible move is made. What this encounter truly highlighted is the central philosophy of 21st century American naval power. It is not about the raw strength of individual platforms, it is about the unbreakable unity of the network. The Su-30 may be a formidable fighter, and the Type 209 may be a stealthy submarine, but each operates largely on its own. The U.S. Navy fights as a connected system. Through networks such as Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air, the P-8, the Growler, the destroyers, and the Hawkeye do not act as isolated machines. They operate as one distributed awareness, sharing information, adjusting in real time, and responding as a single force. The Hawkeye becomes the eyes for a Super Hornet flying with its radar silent. The destroyer's sonar picture strengthens the P-8's search. Every platform contributes to a larger whole. It is less a collection of ships and aircraft than a single networked organism made of steel, sensors, software, and discipline, thinking and moving together. And yet, even that technological ecosystem is not the true center of power. The most important element is the human one. The decisive advantage comes from training. The real weapon is the judgment of a commander who can process legal risk, tactical movement, and electronic warfare in seconds and still make the right decision. It is the instinct of a pilot who can move into a dominant position and communicate total control with nothing more than presence and precision. The massive investment in hardware means very little without the thousands of hours invested in the people who operate it. That is the true return on investment. A carrier strike group costs an extraordinary amount, but its purpose is not only to win wars after they begin. Its deeper purpose is to create such overwhelming influence, such credible and undeniable capability, that potential conflicts lose momentum before they ever fully take shape. In the end, no shots were fired, no international law was broken, and no dramatic battle filled the headlines. And that may be the strongest statement of power of all. Because in modern conflict, the most decisive victory is often the one your opponent does not fully understand until the moment has already passed. The loudest message is sometimes the one delivered in complete silence.